Hey everybody, welcome to another video. Today I wanted to talk about how you can use landscape materials to art direct procedural content using PCG as well as some material work. So first thing, I just wanted to demonstrate what this is actually capable of doing. So here I've got a bunch of procedural content just to kind of simulate grass. And one thing I can do is decrease the density of the grass. Right, so I can delete points, spawn points, using my landscape painting, or I can paint it back in again. I can reduce the height of the grass or increase the height of the grass based on landscape data. And this allows me complete artistic control over the procedural content, rather than just relying on the generated data itself. You'll also notice that the color is coming from the height. So not only are we affecting the transforms, but we're also passing some of that data from the landscape material to the actual static mesh material. Now, most of you are probably already familiar with one way of passing material data from a landscape to a static mesh, and that is with runtime virtual textures. So for example, over here, I'm passing the landscape's texture as well as normal data to this sphere so that it can do some blending, right? And that works pretty well, but it does have some limitations in that there's only a finite number of buffers that expect specific values. And the issue is that if you're using all of them already, so for example, if I wanted to get a nice blend going between my landscape and my materials, I would already be using all of these inputs. And that leaves me no more inputs to pass through other arbitrary data like parameters or additional information to be cached for the grass rendering, for example. So this is where the procedural content comes into play. So if I go to the landscape material here, you'll see there's my grass height and grass weight, and they're not connected to anything. They just exist there to generate the layers in the material. Then if I go to my procedural content graph here, you'll see that the grass height and the grass weight can actually be sampled within the procedural content. So in this case, it's using the get landscape data node, and I'm projecting a grid onto the landscape, which then allows me to get that data for spawning foliage meshes. So the first thing I'm doing is taking an attribute noise and filter. This controls the density, right? So I'm taking the density, creating an attribute noise with it, and that just makes the density values random. And then I'm comparing that to the grass weight, and that will allow me to control how much grass is spawned, right? Filter out points of grass based off of the weight painted value. And then I'm taking the multiply node, and I'm taking the scale in the z direction in this case, but you could obviously do more than that. And I'm multiplying it by the grass height. So anywhere that's the grass height is painted 1, it's going to have a value of 1. Anywhere it's painted 0, it's going to have a value of 0. But I don't actually want my grass to have a value of 0, or else it would look like this, right? So instead, I'm adding 1 to that so that I have a range of 1 to 2. And that's going into the transform points, just so I can add some random jitter to the positions, and finally the static mesh spawner. The static mesh spawner, obviously I'm selecting the mesh, I'm making a foliage instance. Nothing really special there, except inside this drop down here, the instance data packer type. If you set that to PCG instance data packer by attribute, it'll give you access to a section down here, instance data packer parameters, and you can add elements to an array, and this will be passed into the custom instance data of the material that mesh is using, right? So I can go ahead and go to my windy grass node here, and you see that I've got a per instance custom data with an index of 0 to match the index of 0 on my attributes. And that is what's allowing me to pass the color of the attribute from 0 to 1 into the base color of my mesh. And this is really interesting and useful because it allows you to do a lot of stuff that isn't possible through transforms alone, right? So say, for example, you wanted to, you'd be able to reduce the wind strength of the shader based off of either something painted in the landscape or something that you've put in your procedural content, right, as a control for the wind strength. This allows you to sample that data within the material and control your look. And all of this serves to allow for a lot more control over the art direction and just purely procedurally generating the information, right? So you can go far with procedural content, but sometimes it's nice to still be able to have some artistic control over what is being generated. And this is just a couple of ways that you can do that using the landscape pipeline, because essentially it's vertex painting, right? So giving yourself the power to vertex paint procedural content attributes is a really powerful tool, hopefully, that you might be able to use in your pipeline. That's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching.